I'm going today to demonstrate how to cast onto double-pointed needles. There are several ways of doing it, and this is just my personal way, which works for me. I'm going to cast on 12 stitches per needle. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I move the stitches back from the tip of the needle, pick up the second needle, and do the same thing. Put the threads either side of the needle to start, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Then pick up the third needle, and again cast on 12 so that they're stacking up. Oh, a little dust on this thread. Okay, so 1, 2 once again, and we're going to do, oops, that's what I don't want to do. I want to get them pretty much as close as possible, which is why I tend to hold them parallel so that the stitches snug up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So now I have 3 needles in my hand. I'm going to push that back a bit and pick up the fourth needle and cast on the last 12 stitches. There's a method to my madness. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so now I have my 4 needles. Now what I have to do is very gently twist them. So I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what's going to happen is, by holding the 4 needles in my hand and then gently turning, turning, I get my square. And now I'm going to turn my square upside down or right side up, and depending on which way you're thinking. And this way I limit the likelihood of a twist, though and you can see here that each needle, let me pin them here, each needle I have the comma-like bottom to a long tail cast on, and if I roll one over, you can see the back of the long tail cast on sort of looks like a row of pearls. So I know my needles aren't twisted, and I find for me that holding the 4, twisting them into this box shape is one way to ensure I don't get a twist in my cast on. So you might try it this way. I mean, you do need to do your entire cast on all at once, and so with 60 stitches you'd be doing 15 instead of 12. But so now what I do is I want to join in the round. Now when I'm doing double pointed needles, I find it very easy to make a join, and I just make a join. There are a number of ways to make a join, and they're listed in the web page of crossing the first stitch with the last, using the tail as well as the regular yarn to do the first 2 stitches to join. Then you just have to put a marker to remember that your join is here and not 2 stitches later. Casting on 1 extra and moving it over and knitting the 2 together. Whatever way you want to join, you join. The trick is to make sure that your stitches are not twisted, and join and make it around. Now when I'm knitting in the round, I think of knitting is different than knitting flat. With knitting flat, at the end of each needle, you knit all the stitches on the needle, you turn the work 180 degrees, the front becomes the back becomes the front, and you continue on knitting. When you're knitting in the round, you turn the work, let me just continue, but you don't turn it 180 degrees. You don't turn the back to the front and the front to the back. You do what I like to call, oh, I just made a mistake. Alright, I'll rectify that in the next round, because I just used my needle and I can see where it is. What you do is, when you're knitting in the round, is you crank the work. You turn it to the right. In this case, it's a quarter turn, or will be, because I'm going to go back to knitting on 4 needles. Possible to knit on 3, so it's not a major mistake. And once you've cranked it 120 degrees or 90 degrees, you continue knitting the next round, or the next row, and the front of the work, and you can see those little comma-like stitches at the bottom for a long tail cast on. And I do recommend, when you're casting on for the round, to use a cast on that has subtle or slight differences, but differences between the front and the back, so that you can see your cast on edge and make sure that you are not twisting your cast on, and you're joining perfectly in the round. And again, so here we have a triangle. Oh, it's 60 degrees. It's 60. And it has 180 degrees. So yes, it's 60 degrees. So I crank it 60 degrees and continue knitting. If it was 4 needles, which I'm going to go back to, I'd be cranking it 90 degrees. Okay. So what we're going to do is knit this. And again, you can see visually what you're doing, because you can see the bottom of the cast on has been the same. You haven't had a twist because you've cast onto the 4 needles right away. There's been no twist because you're joining in the round at the very first row. That helps avoid the twist. There's a lot of different I'm trying to do this quickly because I think you watching me knit is pretty boring for you. Okay, so now I'm going to crank it again, and I'm going to pick up a spare needle. Actually, I have to do that halfway through the row, and I'm going to come around to the round, and not that this stitch, that's a yarn over, but it's going to make your join easier, and your you'd think it would give you ladders, but it doesn't. It just gives you a little extra ease by straddling the yarn over the 2 needles. Okay, so here we come, and we're back to the beginning of the round as marked by the tail. And now I pick up my 4th needle, and again, crank. So the needles were here, crank them so that the topmost. Now, as you see, I've been doing knitting around for a very long time, and I can just ignore the other needles. I don't think about them. I recognize they're there, but I just join and knit in the round and make it look easy. When I was learning to knit in the round, this first round took me at least half a dozen tries, maybe a dozen. I was 9, I hardly remember, but I certainly do remember I didn't get it on the first try. So there we are, having worked in the round and having worked 1 round and a bit, and the beginning of the yarn, or the yarn tail for me, is a good beginning of the round marker. This shouldn't be this way. This should go in the center, or I would knit on it. And that's one of the ways that you can join and begin to knit in the round using DPNs. Don't expect it to be as smooth and as seamless as I've just demonstrated till you've done it a dozen or 2 dozen times. I first learned to knit in the round when I was 9, which puts it over 50 years ago. So I've had 50 years of practice of doing this. And this way is not demonstrated very much anymore, though this is the way that was common when I was learning. When circular needles were less common, it was just fairly common to cast onto your stitches onto 4 needles and then join. And as I say, I find it makes for a very seamless join, that it's a good way to get a join that is not twisted, and that's a nice skill to have. There's going to be more knitting in the round in the next video.